Welcome again, everyone, to TNS Radio Ireland. You're listening to Mike Montagne, original 1968 architect of mathematically perfected economy, speaking on mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation. Archives of this program can be downloaded freely at tnsradio.com from the category Mike Montagne and from the domain perfectedeconomy.org. Original material, analyses, and solution, as always, are copyright and trademarked by yours truly, Mike Montagne. All rights and therefore claims of authority are reserved. Copies of this program can be downloaded and distributed freely only so long as the entirety of this program, including this copyright and trademark notice, remain intact. Good to have you with us again. I've received a lot of correspondence over the past few days regarding this mandate and how all this is to play out as a strategy. Actually received some rather profound emails the last few days, and I thank everyone for them. I'm going to read what I'm going to call a semi-final draft of the mandate again today. I know that I've done this before, but in effect, this is more or less a lifelong work. Many people have provided their powers of input and editorial skills to the document, with, in fact, however little contribution. It's largely fallen on my shoulders to revise its structure, more or less. Mostly has been the issue here, so that, well, basically I have an issue here where I'm hanging my laundry out to dry forever, and I'm very concerned that this is as perfect a document as I can make it, while at the same time I could spend much more time at this document, although I've in fact spent inordinate hours at it already. On the one hand, it needs to be rushed into service because people are depending on it. On the other hand, it needs to be relatively airtight, and I leave it to your judgment whether it is or not. And I also plea, if others can contribute to it further than already has taken place, that it may be refined to any further extent. And I don't mean to be soliciting more or less amateurish appeals to alter it somehow, but what I am asking is if anyone who understands its strategies well really sees a fine point, or is aware that the document's outline, so to speak, might be refinable. I could appreciate their red pencil. The issues are largely with its structure, that is, an attempt not to completely eliminate any repetition at all, but there's a course, or more or less, of cycling through the document that requires a structure where a point may be introduced but not to its fullest extent at that point, and then might be erased later and expanded upon further. And this outline is the best concept that I can come up with for this document. I do have considerable experience with patent documents which may bear upon this. But anyway, first of all, I think what we need to understand is that we're all in a situation. Many of us are unemployed. All of us are underemployed. All of us have been deprived of an opportunity to prosper as we would have normally and naturally in our lives if it weren't for this obfuscation of the currency which multiplies falsified indebtedness upon us into the present terminal falsified indebtedness. So the question about our strategies is, it relates to an issue that has long plagued me in everything that I try to do. That is that newer people who just come into the idea assume that something hasn't been tried that needs to be tried already, whereas, for instance, I've already presented mathematically perfected economy to every sitting president and most of the presidential candidates since Gerald Ford, since and including Gerald Ford. So as we reported quite a number of these experiences already, nonetheless, each and every one of them has amounted to little but evasion. There was some interaction with the Reagan campaign and administration. There's been interaction with many campaigns, intensive even. But when it comes to the candidates, somehow the idea just never gets responded to. And this isn't just a curious coincidence. It's in fact a very, I wouldn't say it's a very carefully crafted evasion. I would say it's a resorting to evasion, which is a consequence of being on the wrong side of the line. In other words, these candidates don't really represent us. In every election, they try and spew off some catchwords and dogma and slogans which appeal to us somehow. Ron Paul, for instance, is pretending to advocate ending the Federal Reserve System, whereas in truth, Austrian economists are advocates of banking. So while this seemingly pleasant gentleman has an appealing, aw shucks sort of personality and is presenting himself as if he represents an ending of the very crimes against us which are responsible for our consequences. On the contrary, he is representing those crimes in being an Austrian economist, which he even boasts of. More or less, he's not a particularly boastful character, but he proudly asserts that he's an Austrian economist, which, is we have already covered, advocates a complete divorce from mathematics, as if a mathematic thing can't be resolved by mathematics. And so it, like conventional economics, in fact, it differs very little from economics, except even being more preposterous in its divorce from mathematics in particular, and its mere assumption that interest is somehow justified because the only resistance to interest which it can convey in its own research, it ascribes to mere religious sentimentality, which of course is to merely ignore the mathematic facts that interest can only multiply falsified indebtedness in proportion to a circulation or remaining capacity to service debt, which of course precipitates in the present terminal failure. So, in truth, in being an advocate of banking, Ron Paul is an advocate of the very crimes against us, either purposely or inadvertently. Whatever the case, it makes little difference. Because if we cannot account for our condition and its resolution, in truth, we're unfit to lead. So, without further ado, I suppose, I will attempt to explain this mandate as I read it today. Uh, First, I suppose I should say that it's a strategy. That is, it's a strategy where over literally 43 years, anything and everything that anyone has raised is a possible way to fail in achieving this obligatory objective of establishing mathematically perfected economy. Any possible way has been sealed to the extent that is possible. This doesn't mean that it's impossible that we succeed in this because there's something left which may be a fault that would allow us, our foes, to prevail still over us. In fact, if I were a foe, I would run and hide. I would throw in the towel over this document. Because this document makes it treason for them to persist in the crime any longer from the moment that anyone signs it. Anyone, as a sovereign individual. It becomes a crime of treason for anyone to even delay this in any way at all, unless they can prove a number of things, including that the purported banking system gave up lawful consideration in its falsification of debts. And we know that this never happened, because whenever we issue a promissory obligation, the only property we receive for it is the property we acquire from the true creditor, who takes our promissory obligation, or in this case of the obfuscation, who takes a further representation only of our promissory obligation from the purported financial system on our behalf, ostensibly, but of course which is not on our behalf, because this obfuscation is simply a means to steal from us and to multiply its means of stealing until we suffer the present terminal failure, as we've explained over and over again. So the strategy is to close all avenues